Hello all. So I wanted to do a video about becoming a prescribing psychologist. Now I did a video about this in the past, but I wanted to go a little bit more in depth about how to become a prescribing psychologist. I wanted to give a little bit brief history about how to become a prescribing psychologist. I wanted to talk a little bit about the salary of a prescribing psychologist. And I wanted to talk about some of the state requirements of becoming a prescribing psychologist. Now, there are 5 states where psychologists with extra training can prescribe medications that are psychotropic, and that are New Mexico, Louisiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Idaho. Now, the American Psychological Association gives a brief history of the prescribing psychologist movement, so I am going to read a little bit of that now. The movement to grant psychologists the right to prescribe psychotropic medication took root in the late 1960s when the APA identified psychopharmacology as a discipline of psychology. From 1991 through 1997, the Department of Defense begins a 6-year trial program to train 10 psychologists to prescribe medication at assigned military bases. The program was successful, demonstrating that psychologists can be taught to prescribe safely. Some of the psychologists are still prescribing, and appropriately trained psychologists may now be credentialed to prescribe in the Defense Department, the U.S. Public Health Service, and the Indian Health Service. In 2002, New Mexico becomes the first state to enact a law allowing appropriately trained psychologists to prescribe psychotropic medication. In 2004, Louisiana passes legislation providing prescribing rights to psychologists. In 2014, Illinois enacts legislation granting prescriptive authority to licensed psychologists with additional specialized training in psychopharmacology. In 2016, Iowa passes legislation granting licensed psychologists who are trained in psychopharmacology with prescriptive authority. In 2017, Idaho follows suit. Now, I wanted to talk about some of the state requirements to become a prescribing psychologist. Now, as you know, in order to become a licensed psychologist, you have to have a doctorate degree. Now, that is either a PhD or a PsyD. A PhD is a Doctor of Philosophy, and a PsyD is a Doctor of Psychology degree. The APA talks about how to become a prescribing psychologist in 3 states, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Illinois. Now, as I mentioned, you have to have a doctorate, a PhD, or a PsyD, but they also mention after receiving his or her doctorate, a psychologist must complete 1,500 to 6,000 hours of supervised clinical practice and take a national exam in order to become licensed. In some states, a jurisprudence exam is also required. While each state develops its own educational requirements, the training for a licensed psychologist to prescribe is rigorous in all of the proposed legislation. In Louisiana, psychologists must complete a postdoctoral master's degree in clinical psychopharmacology. In New Mexico, requires a minimum of 450 hours of didactic instruction along with a 400-hour supervised practicum as part of its eligibility criteria. In Illinois, psychologists seeking prescriptive authority must complete advanced specialized training in psychopharmacology, as well as full-time 14-month supervised clinical rotations in various settings such as hospitals, community mental health clinics, and correctional facilities. And I will also link these articles so you can read further about the requirements to become a prescribing psychologist in those states. Now, there is not a lot of information regarding the salary of a prescribing psychologist because I believe that most of the job postings that you'll see, they are just asking for a clinical psychologist with prescribing rights. I don't know the difference in pay per se, but I do believe that you could expect anywhere from about 50,000 to it could go up to about 150 to $175,000, depending on what state you're living in and where you're working in terms of the setting.